Good evening to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here. It is Monday, the 11th day of October, 2021. I am in Houston, Texas. In fact, at the end of one of the runways here at my hotel, George Bush Intercontinental Airport, IAH. You can hear the jets going over, perhaps. I mean, that's the runway literally right outside my window. Why am I in Houston? I'll be heading down to Mexico starting tomorrow morning with my colleague Brent Lynn for Hurricane Pamela, what will be Hurricane Pamela tomorrow, presumably. And I'll talk about what we're going to do down there and what we expect to see and observe and capture data-wise. But first, I find this to be very interesting. We have this La Nina type pattern, very cold anomalies in the Pacific, the equatorial Pacific, very cold relative to average, the warm Atlantic all over the place, with the exception of where these tropical cyclones have kind of hacked away at those warm anomalies. And yet, despite this, we don't have any activity to speak of in the Atlantic basin, just a couple of low probability areas of development, planes going over. And then we have struggling Pamela in the eastern Pacific, despite the fact that it looked like it was really going to ramp up today. It still has time to do so, but it's like things are in a funk. And you could say, well, it's the Madden-Julian oscillation. It's over in the western Pacific. And we looked at that recently, and there's no super typhoons over there. It's not like a big flurry of a whole bunch of typhoons. In fact, globally, the tropical cyclone activity is pretty low right now overall. And October in the Atlantic basin has been next to nothing. We almost had a tropical storm, subtropical storm off the Carolina coast this weekend, but that's about it. And I just think that's really interesting. It's not as exciting, quote unquote, and just the definition of the word exciting. Exciting doesn't mean good. It's not as exciting as when we get a lot of hurricanes like last year. I get that. But from a scientific point of view, I find it almost as interesting. It's just a different kind of interesting. It's like a flip side of it. Why aren't we having any activity right now to speak of? So it's just interesting. I thought I would pose that to you to start the discussion, kind of like my monologue as we get things going. All right? So looking out across the Atlantic, to that end, here we are. A couple of disturbances out here. Low chances of development. They will still bring some showers and thunderstorms and gusty winds. The potential for some flash flooding through some of these regions for sure as they pass through and around. You don't want to discount that, but nothing seen in the long term of any potential development, especially over here in the climatologically favored area of the Western Caribbean. This is also pretty favored as well, but we see more activity, generally speaking. That's a big one going over there in the Western Caribbean, and I see nothing going out into the next several days. We'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. So the satellite view, as the sun starts to go down across the western hemisphere, there's Pamela in the eastern Pacific. Let's highlight this better with red there. So there's Pamela. Again, it's not nothing, but it certainly is struggling. I think we were thinking that it would be a hurricane by now, and it's got some dry air intrusion, upper level shear or mid-level shear. It's just interesting. Like, why isn't it strengthening? It's sitting over very warm water relative to what's happening down near the equator down here where the water temperatures are much colder than average. But we'll see. We'll see how this pans out. Then you've got these other disturbances out here, and they're bringing some gusty winds from time to time. This one will move across the windward and leewards here in the next couple of days. Upper level low spinning here in the vicinity of the northwest Bahamas near Florida. And then there's that big mid-latitude cyclone, just a storm system, if the fancy word for it, mid-latitude cyclone. That moved through this way yesterday and gave you all that hail and severe weather in portions of Oklahoma and even down into Texas. So, interesting October pattern, but, last year we were having just dealt with Delta down here, and then we would have Eta and Zeta and Iota all down here, making October and November extremely active last year. This year, for the first 11 days of the month, very little going on. And I just find it to be very interesting. All right? So let's move along here. I don't want to get hung up on that. Here's Pamela this evening. Convection, kind of sporadic. You don't see much in the way of strong banding. Certainly no well-developed core showing up. And again, that's very weird. Like, why? Why isn't it intensifying? I don't know. I don't know what the reason is. The global computer models, the regional computer models, generally showing favorability. It still has 36 to 40 hours or so that it can really ramp up over the very warm water of the Northeast Pacific, away from that colder ENSO region that I showed you. And it could still become a Category 3 at some point. And it looks like it could come in pretty close to Mazatlan here. And this is no small village. This is a pretty big city. And the center line, the center of the eye, that's what this black line is right here. The center of the eye is only going to be less than 20 miles from Mazatlan if nothing changed. So depending on what the radius of maximum winds are, early Wednesday morning, how far out the wind field expands or extends, if that does develop a core, all of that's really going to come into play there. And if this comes just to the north of Mazatlan and they get that, I'll just draw it in for you. Let's say this is dead on exactly what happens. So the center comes in through here, and you divide this up into quadrants. That right front quadrant there, Mazatlan's going to have a really rough day there on Wednesday, even if the center comes right over the top of them. Bottom line, this has the potential to be a very significant hurricane for this region, even if it's not living up to what the GFS was painting a couple of days ago, where it showed it getting really, really strong in the low 930s for pressure. That could still happen. You never know. But it's just an interesting situation. It moves up into and across the mountains. It loses the low-level energy, but the mid and upper levels keeps on going. And then some of that gets up into, after crossing the Rio Grande here, gets up into Texas, maybe eventually into Oklahoma. I'll show you that more in a minute from a graph. Let's just do it now. Why delay, right? So here, this is an interesting tweet from the Weather Prediction Center. A slow-moving frontal system, as well as an influx of moisture from a tropical system in the Pacific, that will be Pamela, could bring a nice slug of moisture up into the region here from southwest Texas all the way up northeast from there through Dallas. And so this frontal boundary coming in, kind of bumping into all that moisture, helps to wring it out. That's your forcing mechanism, everything kind of scrunching together. All that moisture streaming north, and then that front squeezes it. You wring it out over this area. And as you can see from the color scale there, some of those rainfall amounts in excess of 4, 6, maybe 8 inches, there could be some flooding, especially across some of the more hilly areas near Austin. So this is a story we're going to want to follow. These Pacific systems, they don't just stop when they hit the coast. There's no magic force field there. We see that when they come across Mexico, and they work their way up into the desert southwest sometimes, West Texas, etc. They come up out of the Pacific into the desert southwest from the Baja and the Gulf of California. And then this time of year, they come in because of that trough that's digging in and sending the high running away, so to speak. It erodes that ridge over here. It's easy to curve these things in, and after the impacts in Mexico, you bet you can get some heavy rain up into portions of the lower 48. So this graphic, we'll have to revisit this and see how it turns out going forward. All right, real quick, as I finish things up, then we're going to talk about what I'm going to be doing and why I'm going to Mexico. There's the vorticity signature of Pamela. Here's the leftover energy from the system off the North Carolina coast, still there. There's one of the systems the Hurricane Center outlooked in the vicinity of the Greater Antilles down there, and this is the other one approaching the islands. And I will say, if we had better conditions, these would go on to develop. But there's something just kind of keeping things down right now. Upper level winds are pretty strong. There's just not a lot of mechanism to get things going, as they say. Not that anybody's complaining about that. But there's some energy out there. There's just no real spark to set that energy off. And as I'll show you here on the GFS, as I start to wrap things up, before I talk about what we're going to do with Pamela, Brent and myself, the soon-to-be hurricane presumed. Presumed, is that a word? Presumed. But let's first look at the GFS here over the next few days. You see Pamela come into, it looks like it just disappears right over there. Again, it's the way the model can't see those mountains down there or whatever. I'll have to talk to somebody at INSEP that develops this and ask them, why does it just do that? But anyway, Notice too, out in the tropics here, not much going on. There's this big trough sitting out here, and it's just late in the year. It's freaking October, for goodness sakes, almost mid-October. So you don't expect much to happen, and I don't see much happening. There's 5 days, and we just take this on out to day 10 for the heck of it here. So between now and the 21st of October, just straight trade winds all the way down into the Caribbean, no problems at all, and I don't anticipate any changes in that. There's no, like you can say, well, the MJO is coming, and we thought it would. I just don't see much change. So maybe we get through the entire month. I don't know. It's still 2/3 of the month left. You never say never. All right, so what are we going to do in Mexico? Brent and myself? Well, the idea is, and again, let's just assume that this track is exactly right. And let's say that it comes in something like this. This is the extent of any kind of an eye that it has. And then let's just change this to yellow. And let's say that this is a pretty good extent of the overall wind field. Pretty big area about like that. And of course, inland from there. So what we want to do, in addition to documenting stuff from our cameras, we want to take this bag of pressure sensors, a whole bunch of them there. It's a dozen of them. These are little Kestrel pressure sensors. And we zip tie these. You reset them. And we got brand new batteries, big lithium battery packs to put in. The batteries themselves are like the size of a quarter. We have a big pack of them. Brand new batteries, set those up, zip tie them in places where nobody will know they're even there. I know a lot of people have been like, you shouldn't go to Mexico. People are going to steal your stuff, and you're going to have trouble with the cartel, and so forth and so on. I mean, not much I can do about that, but I still think these little tiny things, nobody's going to know they're there. And Brent has been working on getting some contacts down there, especially in Mazatlan. But the goal is to set these up across like a fence, if you will. In the front row, so to speak, down here. This is just an example. Set a bunch of them out like this, and then maybe another set of them back here like this. And again, this is just an example. And then have the Hurricane to be run across it. And then we would have somebody's trying to call me. I'll have to deal with that in a minute. Then we will have this wonderful network of pressure traces from Pamela in another country. And I just think it's worth the effort to do that. No matter what the intensity is when it comes in, we'll do the best we can. We'll document it. We will be careful. We have a guide that's going to go with us, somebody that knows the area. They speak Spanish, fluently, obviously. So we're confident. We're confident about it. So Brent is going to be leaving from Atlanta, getting into Houston, and then tomorrow we're going to head down, eventually ending up in Puerto Vallarta, and then drive up to Manzanillo and do our thing and see what we get and see what Pamela does. And I'll tweet what I can. Most of our equipment should work down there. I just can't haul 15 cameras down there. So hopefully we'll have some live streams, and I'll post some stuff on Twitter. We'll certainly be keeping our Patreon crowd updated as well, and we'll see what we get. All right. So again, that's the big plan. We're going to head out in the morning. I'll post on social media, keep you informed as to what we're doing, and we'll hope for the best. You guys have a good evening. I'm going to see who's trying to call me so feverishly. I'm Mark Sett of HurricaneTrack.com. I'll talk to you again sometime tomorrow from south of the border.